In front of the open fire, in the living room of the cabin, this is 5 Games for Doomsday's Christmas message. I want to start by thanking you for letting my feeble tones dribble into your ears on this festive day. You could be listening to the representative of an anachronistic faux government whose sole qualification for receiving millions in tax revenue and propping up a system of deference that results in countless harm is the fact that she was the daughter of a stuttering inbred who got his job because his Nazi brother ran off with a millionaire. Or you could be unenthusiastically wading through an alternative Christmas message that, in its attempt to stay relevant with the youth, does nothing but curdle the turkey in your stomach. You know, thinking of it that way, I'm surprised that more of you aren't here. In fact, stop this, grab your family or the poor unfortunates you're spending Christmas with, and huddle round the wireless to hear me pontificate. It could be your new Christmas tradition, and at least it'll give you a great excuse to drink yourselves blind. This is a craven aping of a Christmas address. I want to talk about the world in and around the cabin and reflect on where I've travelled since February. I also want to highlight some of my favourite memories and think about what might happen in the future. I want to warm your cockles and gladden your hearts, so grab a booze, dunk a mince pie in it, and we'll begin. 5G4D was born out of the immolation of my previous show, Perfect Information. It would be difficult to witness a more unseemly parting of the ways, but suffice to say, I started the 21st of December 2017 with a brassy, funny and intelligent podcast, and ended that day without one. A series of ugly recriminations followed and hillocks of mud was slung. Surprisingly, people seemed to care, not just about the grotesque drama of the breakup, but about the loss of the show itself. This is the thing, you see, about throwing your voice into the internet. It can feel that you're throwing your time and talent and energy into blackness. I'm an actor and have spent a lot of time on the stage. In that environment, there is no doubt as to what the people think about you. You know if it crackles or if it's falling flat on its face. It's so much easier to know if you're doing a good job. The act of creativity is an orison to solipsism, and it is only by constant external appraisal that you can avoid a life spent staring at your own belly button. Your opinion is not enough, and if you're releasing your creativity for consumption by others, it diminishes in importance each and every time a person comes across it. You create within the bounds of your own conscience, and its worth is determined by those who consume it. The simple fact that some people seem distraught by the loss of Perfect Information suggested to me that I had a voice that, in whatever small way, people were amenable to hearing. Also, I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a strong element of fuck you in starting a new project, no matter how infantile it was. I wanted to show my erstwhile partner that his pusillanimous attempt to leverage the febrile nature of the internet to force me out of the community was cynical, undignified, and unbecoming of any person that could lay claim to a moral strength, and that I would persist, if I possibly could. In the days following, my brain became fertile ground for the production of podcast ideas, some game-related and some not. I love games, but have many other loves and would like to eventually honour them in audio form, so watch this space. This show, though, sprang fully formed to my mind as I heaved my eyelids open one morning. Ideas have varying merit. There are those ideas that flash across your brain like sparks. They look attractive for a second, then wink out of existence. There are those that are born malformed. You love them like all of your children, but you know they won't survive infancy. There are those that bear the weight of potential. They could develop into something, but they don't yet have the power to walk on their own. And then there are those ideas that walk into a room groin first and demand to be acknowledged. This show was one of these ideas. As soon as the idea descended on me, I knew it was a goer, especially as the BBC had been doing it for the last 70 years. A number of people had reached out to me since the implosion of the previous show, and one of them, Gil Hover, said that he would be happy to help if I were to ever start something new. He was the first person I wrote to, and a couple of weeks later, 5 Games for Doomsday rose out of the primordial ooze, whizzed down some fibre optic cables and into your ears. Here's the first intro, and the first question of that first show. Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose? This week's guest is a wearer of many hats. He's the designer of Wordsy, Battle Merchants, and the wildly successful The Networks, which he published himself through his imprint Formal Ferret Games. He heads up the Breaking Into Board Games podcast, and is the current incumbent of the second chair of the premier board game design podcast Ludology. He is, if you haven't already guessed, Gil Hover. Gil, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
So, you're the first guest on this inaugural new project that I'm starting. How difficult was it to choose the 5 games?
It was pretty challenging because I found myself, like, the games that really said more about me as a person turned out to not be board games, so I wound up giving you 2 lists. I gave you a list of 5 board games, which were tricky to pick, and then I gave you another list of, like, 8 games that most of which were not board games, and a few of which were board games that I don't really play anymore, but they say a lot more about my journey as a game designer.
I have been utterly bamboozled and gratified by the generosity and understanding of the people that have agreed to be on the show. That people will give up their time and energy to be interrogated by a semi-conscious imbecile from Worcestershire is a constant surprise and delight. I have had almost no refusals, and when I've asked guests to take time out to help me prepare for the show, I've been confronted by nothing but effortless grace. In these few short months, I've managed to speak to some of the biggest names in the industry, from influential publishers to top-drawer designers and educators. I've spoken to renowned doctors, mental health professionals, puppeteers, and even Edward Snowden's boss. This has proven to me that this is a hobby that trades in openness and inclusivity, and whatever troglodytes live at the fringes, those at the centre of the hobby are ready to welcome you in. Some of my highlights have been Tony Boydell's gentle defence of swearing. I mean, you how do I put this? You swear a lot, and you are especially fond of the word that a lot of people consider over the line. Do you think there's an element of puritanism within board gamers?
I think the answer is probably the same as the one I gave earlier about sort of people. Do people look down their noses at certain types of games? I think not particularly in gamers. I think people have become quite ingrained at what's taboo and what isn't. I find myself more and more feeling sort of righteously rageful about the world and what's happening in it, and people's preoccupations with whether a particular word is very, very rude or not. It's so ridiculous. Especially when it's a word that's been co-opted by Puritans. They decided that was a rude word. We could have had cabbage as being the rudest word, or as Douglas Adams coined, Belgium, of course. It's so ridiculous that a single word is treated so outrageously. It's a word, and it has a meaning, and it has a true and proper meaning, and we shouldn't stop being so bloody prissy about it. In fact,
and it seems to me that people remove all context. The word itself is intrinsically bad, which makes no sense to me.
It's what it is. I refuse to be cowed by it. I am trying. I mean, it depends on my mood. My blog, if it gets particularly sweary, I'm probably not having a very good time, either at work or at home or both. It is like a diary. So there are elements of my blog sometimes that are perhaps more revealing than you might think. There's a bit more of me that goes into it than you might first see.
Mark Herman's assertion that Edward Snowden is working for the Russians So you worked for Bose Allen Hamilton, and so they became sort of quite famous a few years ago, and this was after your time. Yeah, when one of their employees leaked a lot of information, and of course this was Edward Snowden. What was your opinion when you saw that?
Well, first off, and I want to say that the good news is Edward Snowden did not directly work for me, so I want to say that right up front. Although if it had been 2 years earlier, he might have, because I used to run that office in Hawaii. He's a spy. I mean, I just want me to sort of, he is and was a spy who was manipulated by maybe the Russians, maybe the Chinese, maybe both. And what he did was very damaging to the United States of America. End of story. The true story is, as best I can, and again, I got this third hand, so, I don't even know if it's even 100% accurate, but he started working for us at the behest of the government. The government wanted him to work for somebody. Found him. He's by the way, a lot of things that are untrue about him. They always said he didn't have a college degree. He had plenty of credit. He had enough credits for a college degree, but when whoever interviewed him for the job, it was a system administrator. The guy or gal, I don't remember who did it, who was brought in, did not have the expertise to actually interview him. And we had to bring him back to be interviewed by one of our experts. That's how he's a very bright guy. So from a technical point of view, this guy is very, very good. And this is why I think that, and he would somehow got himself this job. It just happened that we were the holder of the contract, but he was working on a government facility, working for government people. That's why we didn't get in any real trouble. He wasn't under our direct supervision anyway, and he basically was there for 10 days, stole everything he wanted to steal, and then all of a sudden, just like any employee that we didn't really know, like 23,000 employees, he went on sick leave. That happens all the time. People get sick and they go on sick leave. And then a month later, he shows up in The Guardian, and the whole thing breaks. And and they said to us, "Who's this guy?" We didn't even know who he was. I mean, he was just an employee who had signed all the, given all the proper ethics training that he obviously violated every piece of, and and he violated everything that the government did the background checks on him. So that wasn't us. The government does all that, and so he slipped through the government ring, and we just happened to be holding the contract, but. He's a traitor, and he's a spy, and I think nothing good of him. And by the way, just so you know, at some point, Putin is going to want something, and he'll spend the rest of his life in an American prison someday. It could be 10 years from now, but at some point, the Russians are going to want something from us, and he's just one of the pawns. Here's a pawn. He's one of the pawns that's going to get traded back to us for something they want, and he'll go to jail. So that's just a matter of time.
Reiner Knizia and why he doesn't play other people's games. So when I told my friends I was interviewing Reiner Knizia, a lot of them said to me, "Oh, did you know that he doesn't play other people's games?" Is this true, or is this just a vicious rumor?
It is almost true, but one needs to understand why there is truth to it. I'm sitting in my studio at the moment, in the design part of the studio, and I have my almost famous 60 drawers here, and each of the drawers is filled with a new design. And all these drawers are shouting at me to be fed and to be developed. And then I'm cheating, and then I have a few more in the shelves and around here. And so whenever there is an opportunity to play, and essentially we are playing every day, whenever there's an opportunity to play, then these games and the curiosity about, I've spent time developing it further, let's see how that works. And with the other group, they had some problems on this side, let's see how it works with the new group. And so it is just a natural process that the new designs always come to the foreground. And just by necessity, that leaves me very little time to play other people's games. So it's not I don't want to play other people's games. It is just, that's how it happens. But I have a wide circle of playtesters. And of course, these playtesters know a lot of other games. They play games behind my back, other people's games. And I mean that jokingly. So they would come and say, "Oh, there's a great game. There's a new game. There's something you should see." And then they bring it. And then they put it on the table and we play it. So that is happening. Or we do specific research and I'm saying I'm working maybe on a legacy game. So let's see what other people have done because I want to do something radically new. So these things happen, but it's not that I have twice a week a social evening where we just play other people's games. Just no time for that. And it has an advantage to say that as well. I have a principle that I do not look at unpublished materials because your subconscious takes something up, or if you play games which are already published, then you know a solution and for a problem. And when you design a game, you have many problems, challenges to solve, many situations to resolve. What do I do in a tie situation? What do I do in this case? What do I do if somebody is squeezed out of money? And it's very specific questions, but usually with general answers. And if you know the answer of somebody else, it is much harder to think of your own independent answer because the brain is there and it doesn't go anywhere else.
And Dan Hughes calling for sense regarding mental health.
Have you, in the time that you've been working as a mental health nurse, have you seen attitudes to mental health changing, broadly speaking?
I think broadly speaking, yes. I think certainly if you're talking about depression and anxiety, they become very, very accepted as conditions, especially kind of milder depression and anxiety. I think there's a real risk of over-medicalizing things like worry, sadness, grief. We don't need to put tablets to human emotions, I don't think. In my job, I see the extremes. I see the people in absolute torment of various things. So I've almost got kind of overexposure to these kind of things. I mean, and I've suffered with low moods. I've suffered with anxiety, and things, but I'm quite reluctant to label them as depression and anxiety because I've seen the extremes of depression. I've seen the extremes of anxiety. And I think sometimes medicalizing things can disempower the person as well. I think, we're in control of our own moods to a certain extent. Certainly people who are depressed aren't. And I'll be very clear about that. But we also can do things to make ourselves feel better. But if you abdicate all the power and the responsibility for your emotional well-being to a nameless disease and only medication can make me better, I think we do ourselves a disservice. I'm not saying depression doesn't exist. I'm not saying anxiety doesn't exist. It does because I've seen it and it's horrific. I'm not saying the people who say they're depressed aren't depressed either. I just think, I think sometimes we're too quick to medicalize human emotion at times. And sometimes, and we are all human and we all feel sad and we all feel worried and we all feel grief and we all feel loss. And that's fine because that's part of being alive. And we can do things to help us way out of that, and even medication to help our way out of it if we need to. But depression didn't exist before the, pharmaceutical companies discovered antidepressants. It wasn't recognized as any kind of disease. And while I think that's wrong, I think sometimes we're in danger of going too far the other way.
What I want to do with this show is focus on the people in this hobby and let some light in on who they are as people. I'm not concerned with marketing by stealth or building a brand. I want to produce a podcast of the highest quality, and I want you to think of the interview in 5 Games for Doomsday whenever you think of some of the most talented people in gaming. I want this show to grow even more next year. I want this podcast to crack open the world of gaming. I have plans for the expansion of the show. Many of these plans are, as of yet, embryonic, but I will continue to review games in as open and as honest a way as I can. I'm planning on writing and recording session reports for my playthrough of Holding On. I want to do a topic show in which I take listener-suggested topics and recruit an expert guest to lead us through the murky underbrush of this hobby. All of this is to come. But, if you'll indulge me, I want to descend into the sentimental for a second. I look at my Libsyn stats religiously. For those who don't know, these are the stats that tell me how many of you are listening and where you come from. I really shouldn't look as often as I do. It's a kind of website Tourette's. I have the compulsion to see if people are listening. And my constant scouring of this one particular page has taught me one thing. You are. You are actually listening, and month after month there are more of you. You're listening in Indonesia, and Panama, and Yemen, and Japan. You're listening in Perth, Australia, and Bogota, Colombia. Some of you are listening in Berlin, and I know that because I've met you. This gasps my flabber more than you can imagine. Thank you all so much. I don't do this show as a hobby. I want, eventually, for this to be my job. And I treat this show as professionally as I treat my voiceover and theatre work. Anything else would result in something half-assed and slapdash, and that is unacceptable for me. And the reason I continue to work on this show is because you're listening. If you weren't, I'd stop, because there'd be no point anymore. You are the sole reason this show exists. I try to thank everyone that tweets about the show, and this is not community building or marketing flim-flam. I do it sincerely, because I'm thankful that anyone listens at all. So again, thank you. All of you. And I hope that your Christmas, or Hanukkah, or Kwanzaa, or non-denominational pagan sex fest has been everything you wanted it to be. And I hope that you'll still listen to the show, and maybe we can meet at some point in the future, and you can tell me how much I annoy you in person. And if I haven't had to crawl bloodily away from the rabid tinsel and the man eating baubles, I'll see you soon for some more 5 Games for Doomsday.